Good afternoon, friends, and welcome on this March the 24th, Wednesday, of our Lenten study, Words of Life. We are up to the Ninth Commandment today. We'll finish up this study next Monday afternoon, and then we won't have anything else for the rest of next week because it's Holy and got to have other things that I got to get done. We will be picking up another study after we get done with Easter. I haven't figured out exactly what that's going to be yet, but I will let you know, and we'll follow the same format on Monday and Wednesdays, probably in the afternoons. That seems to work pretty well for folks, but for right now, we are on the edge of Holy Week. We are getting there, and we'll just make our way along here. Continuing now with the Ninth Commandment, as we are looking at the Ten Commandments and how they relate to us as Christians today, what Jesus had to say about them. And the Ninth Commandment is, do not testify falsely against your neighbor. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. And we might look at that one and think to ourselves, well, I really don't have to worry about that one too much because I'm probably not going to get called into court to give testimony about anything. So, and when you stop and think about it, that is a serious matter. We can talk. Well, I could fill hours if I did the research, and we wanted to do that. We could spend hours talking about people who have been falsely convicted of crimes they did not commit, based primarily upon the testimony of people who were lying under oath. And, how many TV shows, crime shows, lawyer shows, cop shows have been dedicated to that type of thing. One of my favorite shows was the original Law and Order in terms of the cop process of finding the perpetrators, the perps, and then getting them into court and trying to figure out if you're going to convict them or not. And people being under oath and people who will tell the truth under oath when maybe they otherwise will not, and people who do not tell the truth under oath. And there's just so many stories of people wrongly committed and convicted and sent to prison for crimes that they did not commit. We see stories of people, the Cold Case Society, I believe, is the name of a group that takes up cold cases and and looks at them, and if they find something askance, they'll relitigate and try to get somebody out. It's estimated that between 1 and 4% of the people who are incarcerated right now, who are in prison, are there wrongly. They were convicted under false pretenses, or just they didn't have correct or strong representation, whatever the case may be. Now you say, well, 1 to 4%, that's not too bad. I mean, the legal system's got to be getting it right most of the time there. That's true, but when you realize that there are about 2.3 million people in this country that are in prison right now, that means between 23,000 and 92,000 people are wrongly, falsely incarcerated. They're in jail for a crime that they did not commit. And so 1 to 4% may not sound like a whole awful lot, but 92,000 people, that sounds like a whole awful lot. And that sounds like something that maybe we ought to be a little more concerned about than what we actually are. So this is part of the situation that is being addressed by the Ninth Commandment. Now, in the Jewish law, the Torah, which is part of what we're looking at here in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the following crimes were punishable by death. They were capital offense crimes. Sabbath breaking. How would that go over today if that were the case? Idolatry, blasphemy, stealing, especially if it was stealing humans, kidnapping, especially if they were Jews that you were intending to put into slavery wrongly, And certain forms of dishonoring your parents was also considered to be a capital offense. And we look at those and we go, wow, that's kind of on the harsh side, don't you think? Well, that's one thing that happens when you end up with a society that is a theocracy. In other words, God is at the head, and your laws are basically not only just civic laws, they're religious laws. And your civic laws are in place because of the religious laws and the religion that is running the show. And back then, in those days, those were the punishments. And, it sounds harsh to us, but they were intended to act as deterrents from those particular crimes. And they were also meant as guardrails to help maintain justice and just the regular orderliness of society. But the criminal justice system in any society only works when the people tell the truth in court. Bringing false accusations in court can have, and we know this, absolutely catastrophic consequences. For example, just in terms of the Bible, page in the book of First Kings, chapter 21, and we have the story of Naboth and the king of Jerusalem, who happened to be Ahab, and his wife Jezebel, wanted a vineyard that was owned by a guy by the name of Naboth. He wanted to turn it into a vegetable garden, therefore, because it was close to the palace. And he offered Naboth a very fair price, and even offered him a vineyard in exchange that was a much, much better vineyard. But Naboth said, no, this has been in my family now for many generations. I do not want to sell it. And so Ahab basically throws a fit and pouts and turns his face to the wall, will not eat or wash or anything else. So finally, his wife Jezebel, the queen, addresses the issue. She said, aren't you the one who rules Israel? Get up. Eat some food and cheer up. I'll get Naboth's vineyard for you myself. So she wrote letters in Naboth's name, putting his seal on them, and she sent them to the elders and the officials who lived in the same town as Naboth. This is what she wrote in the letters. Announce a fast and place Naboth at the head of the people, and then bring in 2 liars in front of him and have them testify as follow. You cursed God and the king. Then take Naboth outside and stone him so that he died. And that's exactly what the elders did. They followed the queen's orders. They held a dinner. He was accused by liars, falsely accused, and for cursing God and cursing the king, the punishment was death right there on the spot. And so Ahab gets Naboth's vineyard. And we look at that and we go, oh, how horrible. Well, that wasn't the worst thing that Jezebel ever did. She did a whole lot of things, and that's where we get the name and the significance around Jezebel. But Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 6 says this, capital punishment must be decided by 2 or 3 witnesses. No one may be executed on the basis of only one testimony. So you see now why it had to be 2 people come in. And sometimes, some circumstances, it had to be 3 people that had to come in and give testimony. And their testimonies had to agree. This was one of the problems with Jesus's mock trial when he was brought in before the Sanhedrin. They brought in witnesses to say that he had blasphemed against the temple, but the testimony of the witnesses didn't line up. They didn't agree with each other. And so that should have immediately disqualified any and all of them. It didn't, because the judge and jury already had their mind up at the whole thing. And so Jesus was executed on because of false witnesses. The story's in Matthew 26, starting at verse 56 or 59, excuse me. The chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they could put him to death. They didn't find anything they could use from many false witnesses who were willing to come forward. But finally, they found two who said, this man said, I can destroy God's temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, how general and innocuous basically is that. But that was considered to be a testimony of consequence and of a consequential action or words on Jesus's part. And so, false testimony, two of them finally agreed, and there you go. Now, if you give false testimony in court under oath, in this country anyway, we have a name for it. You probably know that. It is perjury. And if you perjure yourself, that's a crime. And it's a serious crime. You can go to jail for that. Now, usually a judge will give you a chance to recant. And, you want to change your story here now? And if you do, okay. But sometimes it depends on the judge. They won't let you get away with that. And so to perjure yourself, to give false testimony, knowingly give false testimony, is a crime, a serious crime. Now, how does this apply to us here in the 21st century? Well, I go into this particular topic with fear and trepidation, but I'm going to jump right in. Let's talk about politics and the Ninth Commandment. We live in a time now where it is increasingly hard to determine what is and what is not the truth. Political polarization is a real problem in our country right now. It has been for a long time. It always has been. You look at the Civil War, and that was a result of political polarization on the whole issue of slavery. Any kind of insurrectionist act over the centuries has been because a group gets together and they believe that their argument is just and right, and they are being treated unfairly somehow, some way, and they decide they're going to try and do something about it. One of the first acts of insurrection in America after we became a country was the Whiskey Rebellion under President George Washington, in which local distillers, were being taxed for making and selling their own whiskey. And whiskey makers, I believe it was over in western Pennsylvania, took exception to this, and they started an uprising. Well, it was put down, but Washington didn't press charges against them. He pardoned all of them because he thought that, well, maybe this was an unjust law in the first case. But they had their side of the story. And I wonder how that one would have been reported today in the news with the polarization that we're going on. Regardless, I think, of how fair and unbiased a media outlet is or tries to be, and I think most of them do try to be, it is, if it reports something that is critical of a certain person in a certain political party, and this is on both sides, there is going to be pushback from the other side. That media outlet is going to get blasted by the people who support that particular person. They'll get called fake news and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of people in the media outlets have been threatened. They receive threats. I just saw in online news here today that a particular person in, I think it was Romania, who was an anchor reading the news, was just getting ready to go on set. They were live, and all of a sudden she looked up off camera and she started screaming. A woman was charging into the studio and was charging her, and she had a brick in her hand and she was stark naked. And she was yelling and screaming at the person who was reading the news, and she threw the brick, which busted up some of the set. It missed the person, and it took 6 people to subdue her and get her under a blanket and until the police could come. And She's been taken to a psychiatric hospital, but she was screaming and yelling the name of the news person and saying that she wanted to kill her. She wanted her head. She wanted her dead. And now, obviously, there's a person who's got a problem of some sort. But media people get death threats and, get blasted all the time. And we part of the problem is that we choose there's so many media outlets today. I remember as a kid, when it was just over the air television, we had three stations, channel 4, 6, and 10. 10 was CBS, 6 was ABC, and 4 was NBC. And Chet Huntley and David Brinkley did the NBC News. That's basically what we watched, or else over on CBS, Uncle Walter Cronkite, who at one point in time was considered to be the most trusted man in America. Good old Uncle Walter. Imagine that. Nowadays, no, there are so many media outlets and ways to get your news. It is just absolutely unbelievable. And we tend to pick the news outlet that most conforms to what we already believe and confirms our own views and our own belief. And basically what that does is only serves to deepen the divide that is going on in our country right now. We really have not adjusted emotionally, intellectually, psychologically, to the fact that we have so many different sources of information. We haven't adapted to that yet. We need to do that. But this sometimes manifests itself in people of faith who I believe, done quit preaching, done gone to meddling, people of faith who participate in bearing false witness when it comes to the area of politics. And that's in part, because we do not take the time to understand the other side. We just don't listen to people in an effort to understand them. We're listening to be able to respond and to reject. And when you begin to listen in the attempt to honestly understand somebody, understand what they're saying, why they're saying it, where it's coming from, it changes the way you respond to people. It's so easy. I assume, if you're of a different opinion than I am, I assume, number one, that I know what your opinion is. And I characterize it a certain way, which usually is not accurate. But if I listen to you, really listen to you, and I find out that what I thought really isn't what you were thinking, it really wasn't where you were coming from, and I begin to have an honest understanding of what you're thinking and why you're thinking that, that could change the way I think. And that's hard. So we need to try to understand other people's context and their motivation. And while I still may not agree with them, I might appreciate their perspective a little bit better, or even a lot more better. Social media, and by social media, I mean things like Facebook, Instagram, all those kinds of platforms. They're guilty of bearing false witness, totally and absolutely. In the 2016 presidential election, the Pew Center for Research found that 23% of Americans, either knowingly or unknowingly, shared a made-up news story over social media. 23%. 1 out of 4 people almost fabricated stories that aligned with their own biases, their own views, and that's violating the Ninth Commandment, either to do it knowingly or unknowingly. If you do it unknowingly, well, it is paramount that you first verify information, that you say, okay, I heard this, and I got to find out, is this true before I pass it on? And when you're thinking about that, let me share this point too. It is never, never okay to say, they said. Who's they? If you can't put names, or at least Pew Research Center said, or something like that, you can't put names to something, it carries no weight. It means nothing. It is totally irrelevant and invalid. They can be anybody. They can be nobody. They is most often made up. Or everybody says. No, everybody doesn't say, because the fact that you're telling me means that I don't think that way, and so I'm not everybody. So to say everybody or somebody or they is totally, it's an irrelevant statement, and it is simply invalid. You can't do that. Put names to it. Put facts, known, truthful facts to your arguments, and we'll go from there. Fact check, in other words. Do the hard work of verifying information. You owe that to yourself, because if you're passing on false information, you're going to be the one that's going to be embarrassed. And if you're doing it intentionally, well, that's even worse. That makes you an even worse person at that point. So fact check. They said is never a viable resource or an argument. Who are they? Be specific. The information, if you aren't specific, it's no good. It carries no weight. There's no logic. There's no facts. Means absolutely nothing. Now, the golden rule applies here as well. We keep coming back to that, don't we? Love your neighbor as you love yourself, and love your neighbor on the other side of the political fence from you as you love yourself. In other words, listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Listen to understand. If we would try to do that more and more in this country, we'd be in a much, much better place. We wouldn't be so busy trying to vilify one another. Now, that's enough of politics. Let's step beyond politics at this point. Let's get practical. Let's talk about gossip, backbiting, talking about people in an unflattering manner or in a harmful way. That fits here under the Ninth Commandment as well. We've seen it all, standing around at the hardware store to gossip, the beauty salon, the barber shop, around the water cooler. Why do we gossip, huh? Well, when we gossip, it empowers us. It makes us feel better about itself. I know something that you don't, and I'm going to pass it on to you here now. Or as the old wag used to say, I don't repeat gossip, so listen close the first time. Okay? Or gossiping may make me feel morally superior to somebody else. Look what happened to them. Look what they did. And I would never do something like that. Just remember, every time you point that finger in that direction, there's a dozen that are pointing right back at you. And never say never about yourself, because God just delights in turning the tables on those kinds of things. So just be aware of that. Social media makes this a lot easier, doesn't it? Pew Research, again, said that in 2018, 32% of teenagers said that others had spread false rumors about them. And it was more prevalent amongst girls than guys. 39% of the girls said that had happened to them. But again, what does the scripture say about that? Let's look at the book of James, chapter 3, and what does James have to say about that? James says, the tongue is a small flame of fire, a world of evil at work in us. It contaminates our entire lives. And because of it, the circle of life is set on fire. The tongue itself is set on fire by the flames of hell. People can tame, and already have tamed, every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we both bless the Lord and father and curse human beings who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come from the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, it shouldn't be this way. Book of James, chapter 3, starting at verse 6. You betcha. Our goal should be to speak and share words of grace about people, things that build people up, that affirm people, not tear them down. Again, the book of James, chapter 1, verse 26 says, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Oh, who's he talking to? James is talking to Christians there. Yes, he is. And Christians are extremely guilty of this. I remember my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and if my younger brother is watching this, Jeff, you'll remember this. Our grandmother used to write a piece for the weekly hometown newspaper, which was the Knox County Citizen. And she wrote a little column. It was kind of a newsy news kind of column called the Ridge Road News, because they lived out on the Ridge Road. And the way Grandma garnered her information is we had a party line back then. And for those of you who don't know that, this is back when we had rotary phones that hung on the wall, and many people shared the same telephone line. And Grandma would simply pick up the receiver, and she had a way of letting it up real nice and easy so that nobody would hear it click on the line, and she would just listen in to whoever else was talking, and that's how she got her news for the Ridge Road News. And things would pop up in her column, and people would go, I didn't talk to Gertrude about that. How would she possibly know that? Well, party line, folks. And that was the social media of the day. And that was gossiping, because maybe there were things there that people didn't want other people to know about or what was going on. And my grandma was a good Christian woman, but gossip was kind of her thing. Bless her heart. So, do Christians gossip? Oh, heaven's sakes, pity's sake. Yes, of course we do. And true confession time, clergy are just as guilty of it as anybody, especially if we're gathered around with other clergy. We love to gossip about one another. And, oh, did you hear this about so-and-so? And, well, they're going there. Well, why are they going there? And I know it's not just United Methodist clergy. It's clergy in general that way. So shame on us. Now, let's get broader still. Let's talk about just basic dishonesty here. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, we are told, you must not steal, nor deceive, nor lie to each other. You must not swear falsely by my name, desecrating your God's name in doing so. I am Yahweh. Do not lie. Oh, okay. Well, where are we going to take that one now? Well, recently, some well-known and well-to-do parents, you all probably saw it on the news, were found guilty and were sent to prison for bribing and giving false information about their children to get them into the schools that they wanted to do. I say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, most of those schools have limited enrollment. They don't let just anybody in. They're not community colleges. And so by getting a spot for their child via bribery or false information, they were literally stealing spots from other students who might have been more deserving than their children. And so, is that the only place and way that people lie? No, of course not. People lie on job applications all the time. They report a higher income than what they were actually getting. They report higher grades in school. They report degrees that they don't have. Why are we lying? Some people will say, I'm not lying. I'm stretching the truth. Well, come on. And some people are just compulsive liars. They wouldn't recognize the truth if it came up and bit them in the rear end. And that is the truth. They're just some people that they just can't help it. Is that an excuse? Well, I just can't help it. I'm a compulsive liar. No, that is no excuse. So, but that does beg the question now. Is it ever okay to lie? Well, this particular commandment, I believe, is aimed at protecting your neighbor from harm, from false witness and testimony. But there are times when the truth does more harm than a lie does. And the circumstances are rare, okay? As a rule, it is wrong to lie and to deceive, but sometimes the obligation of love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule, and that means do no harm. Sometimes, rarely, that does carry greater weight. Now, again, this is the gospel according to Mike. You might be a person that says all the truth all the time, no matter what the circumstances. And if you are, God love you. I understand where you're coming from. But I cite scripture for an example. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 20, Pharaoh gave the order that the midwives who were going to deliver babies for the Hebrew women, if the baby was a boy, they were to kill it on the spot. But the midwives would not do that. And when word got back to Pharaoh that they would not do that, we're not doing it, he called them in and said, what's the deal? Why aren't you doing what I told you to do? And they made up an excuse. They said, well, the Hebrew women are stronger than Egyptian women, and by the time we get word that they're in labor and we get there, they've already had the baby and they have hidden it, so we don't know. Well, is that the truth? No, that was an absolute lie. They decided that the idea of saving the lives of babies was more important than telling the truth. We also know that during World War II, many good Christian people told lies in order to save the lives of Jewish people from the Holocaust. Thousands, most likely tens of thousands of lives of Jewish people were saved because people lied for the sake of their safety. So the duty to protect life outweighs the duty to tell the truth. Now, I won't get into that one, but these cases are rare. They're few and far between. And they usually use false testimony, false witness to, people that are trying to justify they're telling a lie. What they're really doing is they're trying to deflect blame. They're trying to avoid responsibility. Jesus criticized the Pharisees for being what? Hypocrites, pretending to be what they were not. Jesus himself told his disciples to avoid practicing their piety, their religious devotion before others in order to gain their approval. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, let's just read that here. We have, Jesus said, be careful that you don't practice your religion in front of people to draw their attention. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Oh, okay. Let's keep that one in mind here. So don't practice your piety out there for everybody to see. Now, another false testimony is when we tell ourselves false things about ourselves. Keep beating yourself up. In other words, I'm ugly. I'm stupid. I'm worthless. No. Don't tell yourself stuff like that. It's not true. You bear the imago Dei, the image of God. You are beloved by God, important to God. And so when you begin thinking those kinds of things and having those kinds of thoughts and beating yourself up, remember John chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus said, the devil is a liar and the father of lies. Conversely, though, beware of words that also flatter and try to puff you up, send you on an ego trip, make you think more of yourself than what you actually should. That's just as much of a problem. So, what did Jesus have to say here about the Ninth Commandment? Well, as we talked about before, Jesus was himself the object of false testimony on many occasions. He was accused on several occasions of being demon possessed. Imagine that. He understood that. And that's why he said this in Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5. He said, "Don't judge so that you won't be judged. You'll receive the same judgment you give. Whatever you deal out will be dealt out to you. Why do you see the splinter that's in your brother's or sister's eyes, but don't notice the log that's in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, 'Let me take the splinter out of your eye,' when there's a log in your eye?" It's kind of funny imagery there. Think about that. Some of the big old honking stove stick there in your eye. You deceive yourself. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother or sister's eye. You shall be judged with the same judgment that you pass on and use on others. When Jesus looked at a person, what did he see? He saw good in people. He saw potential in people. The prostitute in Luke's gospel that came to Jesus and poured ointment on his feet and washed his feet with her hair and her tears. He looked at her and he loved her. He affirmed her. The Pharisee in whose house he was eating was horrified by this, and Jesus read him the riot act because of that. The rich young ruler in Mark 10, who went away sorrowing when he said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Give all you have to the poor and come and follow me." Now, he didn't say that to everybody. He said that just to that one young man. And it says Jesus looked at him and loved him. And he was very upset when the rich young ruler couldn't do that and turned and went away sorrowing. Jesus sorrowed as well because he loved him. Paul, in the book of Philippians, chapter 2, has this to say. He said, "Don't do anything for selfish purposes, but with humility think of others as better than yourselves. Instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others." And he points out that Jesus, although he was in the form of God, humbled himself and became a servant. Boy, that's good imagery for us to remember. Jesus took the form of a servant. He was humble, which is the opposite, really, of giving false witness. You would think that the opposite of false witness would be telling the truth, and it is, but along with that also is humility. Humility. Speak words that build up, words that are filled with grace, that encourage other people. Always remember the golden rule. Is what I am saying about this person, is that what I would want that person to say about me? Is that what I want other people saying about me? Okay? Remember the golden rule and just flip it. Is that what I want people saying or doing about me? So the Ninth Commandment calls us to not do harm with our words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Wrong. They do hurt. They hurt a lot. So use words instead to bless, to build up, and to do good, and forgive those who have spoken falsely about you, whether rightly, wrongly, unkindly, in anger. Forgive those who have spoken poor of you. That's our study for today. We'll pick up the 10th commandment. We're almost done. Can you believe it? On Monday next week of Holy Week. So in the meantime, thanks for stopping by this afternoon, and I hope the Lord blesses you real good.